Welcome to Season 3 of Robbie Burns and Friends, a podcast all about music, technology, productivity, and creativity. This week's guest is developer of the note-taking app Drafts and many fine other iOS applications, Greg Pierce. Before we get too deep, I don't know if it makes more sense to do it before or after we talk about Drafts, but I'd love to hear more about your musical background.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's nothing that exciting, but I'm basically, my bachelor's degree is in music from NYU, but I'm not, I actually went to a bit of an oddball program there that was focused on music business. It was part of the music department, but it was kind of an offshoot, and it was designed around people interested in working in the industry in music, not specifically being musicians. And so I did all the core curriculum a music major would do and all the core curriculum a business major would do, but I didn't have to do a specialty in either. So I didn't have to do an instrument in music, and I didn't have to, be a finance major or whatever in the business end of it.
Was the idea that you just sort of smashed together classes from each, or was there an actual curriculum for music business?
Most of the curriculum for music business was around internships and industry opportunities. The program, I think, was kind of it's still experimental at the time I was there. I don't even know if it still exists. It probably doesn't. It was started by a guy whose name I just can't place right now. The guy who started the program up was a big producer from the 70s. He produced the original Jesus Christ Superstar record and a lot of Elton John stuff and all. He was a bigwig at MCA Records like in the 70s and stuff. And somehow he got hooked into this interest in academia and formed this program. And I'd say there were maybe 20 people in the program at the time. It was kind of a small, specific major thing in the corner of the music department.
So what led you that path where you play guitar, right?
I do, yeah. I was a record store brat. Like in high school, I worked in summers in college and stuff. I worked at record stores, and I kind of wasn't so sure I wanted to be a performer, but I loved being around music and wanted to be more involved in it. So it was something that piqued my interest.
Now, did you have a strong background in computer science all throughout this time?
No, none whatsoever. I mean, honestly, I taught myself to program over the years, but I grew up around computers. I kind of had a leg up as far as people of my generation. My dad is a lifer with IBM and does mainframe debugging and programming. So he was always a resource, and we always had, like, when the first Apple II came out, we had one in the house. When the first IBM PC came out, we had one in the house. And so I was always fiddling with them and learning on them from a reasonably early age. But it wasn't anything I took seriously. I've never taken comp sci classes or anything of that sort. It kind of came out of my own projects. Originally doing music production, I got into it. I got into doing desktop publishing in the late 80s and early 90s. And then from there, kind of taught myself to automate things, to make stuff easier, from writing scripts for Quark or even, database, pulling data from databases to load into newsletters, things like that. It was mostly, I was just the person around at a job who had the best knack for it. So I was the one who started diving in and trying to automate processes and stuff. And that's kind of where I got into programming.
When you say the person on the job, what job at this point was this?
Well, I've worked a lot of different places back in the day. I was at various music industry things, and then I was in some nonprofits, and then I went back to grad school for several years in ethnomusicology and folk studies. And then after that, I happened, just looking for work and started some temp jobs and ended up working at a place, family-run manufacturing and distributing company for almost 10 years. And I was always doing side projects too, but I came into that place just when they were computerizing. It was a family-owned company, small to mid-size regional manufacturing company, and they were just figuring out computers, and they had about 20 Macs and in their main office and didn't know what to do with them. They were struggling to figure out what to do with them. So I started helping them, and I originally got sent out there on a temp job, and, they saw what I could do to make their life easier. And I just started doing more and more stuff for them. And they were great people to work for, and we just had a good relationship and ended up there for quite a while, just growing with the company, getting them automated, and, learning myself along the way. But as it was, I had to do the administration and the kind of IT type jobs for them as well. And as they grew and I lost interest in doing that kind of stuff in favor of the programming, I just kind of went out on my own and started doing consulting, and here we are.
Okay, so yeah, wow. Okay, so this path, especially this path, because I think a lot of people who listen to my show are involved with music and probably love technology and, therefore the combination of the two. And I know many people who are in music education specifically who have pivoted towards technology. So that sort of origin story is very fascinating to me. This sort of music business, sort of then having some different jobs and a need for growing to automate things being sort of the impetus for some of your coding. But I have to go back a step. You said you went to grad school for ethnomusicology?
Correct. Yes. And folk studies. It sounds kind of random, but obviously I'm not working in that field. But after my bachelor's, I started working in several nonprofits, and I was getting into, turning my interest in being in the music industry. I had become disillusioned with the commercial music industry, and was very into roots music and ethnic music and stuff at the time. And I was looking to leverage myself more into the nonprofit sector and, work hopefully in advocating for and producing and archiving or whatever else, various folk and ethnic musics and the blues and stuff. So I was trying to figure out something to do in that area and decided it was time to go back to school. So I just kind of explored what I could do in that area. And they had program, again, I looked for something where I could blend together an interest in those areas and business, because I've always felt like the foundation I had in working in business is what allowed me, to this day, to run my own business and be more practical and useful rather than just theoretical and academic, because I always wanted to apply those skills in the real world, I guess. So I went to a program at UNT that was interdisciplinary and allowed me to do ethnomusicology and also split a master's with sociology and business studies.
Wow. Okay. So this is a very diverse. This is cool. So now it becomes clear to me kind of where this eventually led you. And so you are working for a small family business and you are trying to automate things, and this leads you towards the path of coding. This will actually be very motivating to some people listening because, again, I know a lot of people they have one foot into technology. I guess we'll get into this with drafts in a moment. I consider myself to be someone who has one foot in. I do very little to no coding. I'm just starting to learn a little bit of some scripting. But it's interesting to see that it started for you in the same place that it starts for many other people, which is in some cases, a totally different discipline. So let me skip a bunch of steps. And at a certain point, you ended up beginning Agile Tortoise, and Terminology was your first app.
It was the first successful app. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I started Agile Tortoise in 2006, and at the time I was purely consulting. I mean, there was no app store then, obviously.
Right.
And I had left the job at the manufacturing, and they were my biggest client. They had grown, and I kind of said, I'm going to keep doing the development work for you, but you're going to hire somebody to be a system admin and do that stuff in-house. And, we had a good relationship, so that worked for a while. And I took on some other clients and was always looking for opportunities. And when the App Store came around, I started fiddling with it more or less right away, but I didn't have an app day one. Terminology came out in mid-2010 and was my first. It was iPad first, and that was, iPad had just come out, so there wasn't a lot of competition, and it did really well in the store. And again, there weren't that many iPads at the time, but it reached the top 25 overall in iPad stuff, and kind of was what made me believe I could do this as something other than just a side project, and turn my attention more towards apps.
So Drafts is the one that I wanted to talk about in the most detail. Drafts is an app I've been using since, I think, 2011, and it has quickly become my most used, or at least my most tapped on app icon on iOS. And just to give you a real quick background on me, my interest in technology is fairly recent. I got my first Mac in 2006, and my undergrad is in music education. My graduate degree is in percussion performance, and it was really difficult to find a music teaching job the year after I got my master's degree. So I took a year off and did long-term subbing positions while freelance performing in as a performing percussionist. Mm-hmm. But I also started taking on a lot of arranging and composing gigs on the side, and that was when I started to think about, that was also around the time where I bought my first iPhone. So I was thinking, I guess how do I get this document on my phone to sync to my Mac? And then once I got my first teaching job a year later and bought an iPad and started doing sheet music on the iPad and wanted to get documents between all three of these devices syncing, then it was all over. I just started buying every app on the App Store that looked like it could save me a tap or a click. And Drafts made immediate sense to me as a piece of that workflow, a piece of a paperless workflow, but also just an app that helps my mind. I don't know. I can certainly tell you how I introduce Drafts to music teachers, but do you want to briefly describe it? I mean, it's your app, so. Yeah,
sure. I mean, the app itself, it was born of the idea that you need a single place to enter your text on the iPhone. You've got an idea in your head, or something you want to message someone, or something you want to post to social media, or just something you want to journal, anything that is text. I was trying to remove the burden points of having to swipe around your phone, find the right app, open it up, create a new note, or find the right folder to put the note in and create it, or go open the Messages app and have to find the right conversation and all these taps you have to do. I found that it's just easier if you have an app that you launch and it's ready to type, and you type something and you can just put your phone away. So when you have that middle of the night idea, you could just jot it down and not have extra, friction to do that. And then once you had that place to put it, the flip side of Drafts is its action framework, which is what lets you do something with the text. And that started out very simple in the app. It was stuff like email, messages, Twitter. But over time, that's grown and lets you kind of send. My goal is that you can send anywhere. Obviously, that's not completely true, but I just keep trying to integrate more services and provide more power and flexibility to the app so that, anything you might want to do with that text once you jot it down, you can do with Drafts.
Awesome. Yeah, that's the way I typically explain it to teachers. I think, and you asked me when we were talking about recording this, you were curious about how music teachers are using the app. I find that it resonates with teachers because music teachers are this is more or less the same reason anyone would get something out of the app. But I find that in this profession, especially music teachers, our core competencies are teaching and musical performance. and hopefully we're trained to do this well. But
not to interrupt, but what level do you teach at?
No, sure. I'm a middle school band director.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and I have some general music in my schedule as well, and I have experience teaching elementary and high school, and I've taught university level stuff before, but middle school band has been the thing that I've done the most since I've been a teacher.
Cool.
So yeah, go ahead. Were you gonna?
No, I kind of interrupted you. I was just curious what level you teach at. That's a fun age to be teaching, with beginning band and people really picking up instruments for the first time and all.
It's so great. You just recently you have a son who just recently graduated middle school, right?
I have 3 sons. I have twin boys that are sophomores in high school and a 5th grader that's just about to go into middle school. He's picked saxophone as his instrument. My other 2 are band kids too. One's a tuba player and one's a French horn player. And one of them also plays bass in the jazz band.
The tuba player, I would expect.
Yes, correct.
So they, are in it. So you know the deal. I'm sure they have had band directors, and maybe you can get a sense from. I don't know what kind of person your children's band director is, but it can be a chaotic lifestyle.
Sure.
And that was sort of what I was getting at before, was just that the typical music teacher is managing those core professional disciplines, but you have to also be a financial secretary, a trip planner, a composer, an arranger, a conductor, and a director, and you have to sort of juggle these skills. And most music teachers, to be a good one, you have to be good at all those things, but most music teachers are like gasping for air. Mm-hmm. And then not to mention are overwhelmed by technology. So, I've done a bit of presenting at music education conferences over the past 4 or 5 years, and this is typically like the type of educator who's coming into these sessions is they have to almost be disarmed before I can speak to them, because they're just like so overwhelmed by everything, and then you add on top of it this growing need to be competent with technology as well. And then of course I get like random, nerd types as well who come to these sessions and are like, I already have drafts. I'm doing X, Y, and Z and stuff like this. But anyway, I explain drafts to most music teachers, that this is one of these points where you can release some of that friction instead of writing, because we struggle to, manage thought and task. And so in order, instead of like writing that thought or that to-do on the musical score while you're directing, or on a Post-it note and putting it on your computer or a legal pad, just train yourself to have this one place. I think actually it's on your website. It's just try putting drafts on your dock of your iPhone for a week and just tapping on it every time you have any kind of thought or any kind of text you need to type.
Right. It's that great capture tool, and those things that come across your field of all day long. It's a way to get them down, and then later on, when you have a planning period or whatever, a quiet time after school, you can sit there and go to your inbox and drafts and figure out what you need to do about all those things you jotted down, like that. You need to fix the valves on Joe's tuba, and that you need to remember to tell the beginning band parents that they have to be there Friday afternoon, or whatever, things that come up across that are otherwise bouncing around in your brain and you forget half of them or whatever. And, it's a great tool for that sort of stuff. Exactly.
When I'm at the front of the podium and I have 65 band students rushing into my room, I just can't keep it together. So what I do is I have on my iPad, I split the screen. I have my musical score on one half of the screen, and sometimes I'll just have drafts on the other side of the screen. And every little thing, like my trumpet is not working, type a draft, hit the next button. This piece of music is, you didn't give the second clarinets enough copies of, okay, that's going to happen later. And it's great. And then, yes, exactly, sitting at a planning period and just processing those is really cool. Now, drafts can be a note app that functions in the same way that someone might be using Apple Notes on their phone. so I tell people they can use it that way. But the way that I use it is I actually have it set so that it shows me, I have the badge set on it so that I know I don't want to forget anything that's in drafts, because that's my starting point, that everything needs to be processed and then sent to other places.
Yeah, and the new version of drafts is in process and is going to ship really imminently. And we've added tagging and some other features that make it a more suitable app for long-term storage. That has not been the focus of the app in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how it changes the way people do use the app. But I still think its main purpose is quick capture and not long-term storage.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because most of the people that I tell about this app really understand that upfront goal, that here's this clean, blank white slate that I can just instantly start typing into. But it's usually that back-end part. It's what you do once your drafts are in there that does not always immediately click for music teachers. Do you feel like Drafts 5 is in any way, are there other ways that you're addressing that, like making the barrier to entry more simple in any way for users who might be afraid, who might think of it as like this power tool?
Probably in my mind, the best thing I can do to make it more functional for people is to help give people examples. And I'm very much dedicated to improving communication. I'm working on a series of articles and stuff that demonstrate how to integrate with different services, that are examples of what you can do with it. And I think the more I show people those sorts of examples, the more they get it, or they stumble across the one that makes sense for them, And I try to feature, I have a lot of great users in the community who blog about the app or similar things, and I'm trying to do a better job of getting that information out so people get a feel for what you can do with it. I think there's always those kind of things. It's always been an app that sometimes people heard about it somewhere, they downloaded it, they didn't quite know what to do with it, and they played with it a little, and it didn't quite click for them until months after that. They came back around to it, they tried something again, they customized an action, or they heard about it on a podcast and thought of another use for it, and then suddenly they didn't, without even realizing it, it's become an important app in their workflow. So the more I can give exposure to those kind of things to people until they find the things that click for them, the better.
And none of my workflows, or at least I should say, the workflows that I use 99% of my time are actually the most basic offerings that the app has. Things like I would say, actually, sometimes I joke that Drafts is basically just like an OmniFocus client for me. Like, it's just a quick entry. So I've got like a hard and a soft. OmniFocus, for those who don't know, is a task management app. And I've got like a hard and a soft OmniFocus, and one of them just in the background exports to my reminders list, which is OmniFocus is sort of sucking those reminders into its database. And then I've got one that I call my hard OmniFocus. It actually routes me into the app so I can add a due date real quick or something. But yeah, I mean, the message, sending a text to a message or to an email message or Twitter or Fantastical, or even just making it a Google search, all of those are things that require a little bit of training, but I find that once most people get used to it, it's like, oh my gosh, why did I not think of this before?
I mean, the most interesting education-related workflows that I've heard over the years, been from a few different people, but one is a lot of teachers that use it sit down at the beginning of the year and set up an email action for each of their classes. They take their class roster and they set up a single tap action for, first period biology that sends an email to everyone in that, in that class. So that over the course of the year, when they have something to send out to their classes, they can just type it in Drafts and tap one button and, flip it off to the whole class. The other thing that I've seen, I think a principal was telling me this, but as part of his job, he does regular discussions with his teachers and does evaluation notes, So he's got an action set up where he can go into drafts and just type the name of the teacher in the first line of the draft, and then the notes from their discussion, what they need for their classroom, what, feedback they had and stuff, and then tap this one evaluation action that saves it to a file in Dropbox, in an evaluation folder with the teacher's name as the name of the file, that took from the first line of the draft. So he has a simple way to just, over the course of his day, if he has any of those notes that come up, if he has an interaction with the hall with one of the teachers and they have notes, he just types their name in and the note and taps that action, and he gets all that stuff logged, to journal files that he can look up on his desktop later. So it's those kind of sort of little things that make your life a little easier and help you keep track of stuff.
That email one is so simple. I don't know why I never thought about that. Our system our learning management system that our school district uses has the most cumbersome messaging feature that you could imagine. And it's of course it's web-based and it's really clunky, and it sometimes crashes when I'm in the middle of typing a message. So I have to use an app to sometimes drafts is what I use to draft my messages before I very, very carefully plug them in. So that's really, really smart, Or
sometimes you find you've got situations where you need the email to go to somebody who's not set up in that list or whatever. There's a grandma who's always getting little Susie to the concerts instead of mom or whatever, and they tell you to tell her, and you can add those people to those groups and stuff.
Sometimes I'm using drafts too. This is one that is a little bit, it would not be for a new user the first thing I'd recommend, but OmniFocus has those automation features that use the TaskPaper format. Mm-hmm. And I just got together, I co-directed our district's elementary school honor band this past spring, and the co-director and I just got together yesterday morning, and we just we looked through all of our email, all of our notes, and we just created a long list of next year's tasks, basically in order of due date. And she was we were kind of deciding like when each of these things is due, and she sees me adding some of the syntax. There's a syntax. I'll link this in the show notes. But there's a syntax you can use where you can basically have OmniFocus as a task app read that syntax and automatically generate due dates, deadlines, projects based on that syntax. So I'm like adding this, all these like little @ symbols and parentheses and stuff around our due dates and deadlines. She's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh no, just wait." And I click a button and she sees it populate in my OmniFocus with like every due date, every deadline, and she was amazed. So you can do that kind of stuff if you'd like to.
Yeah, the app has very advanced scripting capabilities, and if you do get into the geeky end of it or have, want to teach yourself to program, you can use JavaScript to slice and dice your text up into just about any format you want. And, one of the most common applications is like what you described. People use it with Fantastical, the great calendar app that will parse natural text events. And people use drafts as a front end of that so they can go write 12 events in one line after another quickly and easily, and then tap one button and it just goes over to Fantastical and goes back and forth and turns them all into calendar events.
Right. Yeah, the idea being, lunch. You're talking to someone and you're setting up a lunch appointment for tomorrow at 3 p.m. and you don't want to be rude and start fiddling around on your phone for Fantastical. This is an app I recommend all my listeners check out, by the way. But yeah, you just said you take out drafts, lunch with John tomorrow at 3 p.m. and then later. And actually, the Fantastical integration is built right into drafts. You just swipe to the left, and then do you still just ship it with an export to Fantastical button built in?
Honestly, I'm trying to remember if I ship it with that, but we have an action directory that you can install these kind of actions for third-party apps from, so you don't have to create them yourself. But I don't.
Well, and that's honestly, yeah, for those who want to go a little bit deeper, that's what I recommend. And I'm not that fancy. I am just taking the slightest. I'm like walking up to the ocean with scripting, and like as soon as the cold water hits my big toe, I'm like running the other direction. But I'm really trying. But this is really the way to go for someone who wants just a little bit more out of the app. I actually stole my favorite one that I stole from the Action Directory is the way that I use it is there's a script that allows me to extract certain rows of text that have an @ symbol in front of them and import them into a task app using the reminders list. So the end result is if I'm in a meeting with my music team, I will type the notes, and I actually have a little TextExpander snippet where I type in the letter X followed by the word meeting, and I type in, it prompts me to type in the names of all the people in the meeting, and then it routes me back to drafts with, here's John's list of things to do, here's Susan's list of things to do. Mm-hmm. And my list of things to do, instead of little dashes for each task, it's little @ symbols. And so when I'm done taking the notes, I want to save them. I want to email everyone else my notes, but I also want just my tasks to go into my task management app of choice, which is OmniFocus. So in one tap with drafts, all 3 of those actions happen. I'm prompted with an email to type who I'm going to send the notes to. The notes are saved to my note-taking app, and all of those tasks with the @ symbol in front of them are saved to my task app, and that's all without even leaving the drafts app.
Nifty.
It's pretty cool, and I stole that. I didn't even make it.
Yeah, I think there's so many great examples in our Action Directory that come from the community. I think I've found most people who do get into scripting through drafts started with one of those that pretty much did what they needed, but they wanted to tweak just a little bit, and they got in there and figured out how to change a couple things to, maybe they didn't want it to be an @ sign. They preferred typing a hashtag or something, and they do a little tweak like that, and they kind of get the bug. Start doing more complicated things.
Now, I've talked about the app workflow on this show in previous episodes, which I'll link in the show notes. Drafts works really well with workflow. I have a couple of actions that I'm using there where drafts will actually workflow is actually doing the action on the text, but drafts is sort of like routing the text into workflow to perform that action. Mm-hmm. Some of my favorites are saving to like my Bear notes. I'm using a note app right now called Bear, and drafts I think drafts can do that without routing to workflow, now that I think about it.
It can, but you can tweak things along the way with workflow as well.
Right. Now, it's funny, I use a lot of, I have a lot of notes in my notebook that are, like, I enjoy appending notes in drafts. So I'll have, like, here's, just one giant note where I store really quick thoughts of, here's how things need to work better next year for our Hershey Park trip at the end of the year where we take all the band, orchestra, choir students to Hershey Park. Mm-hmm. That it didn't really work well when we put the tubas on the same bus as the strings. So I type a little note in drafts to remind me, and then I'll have it, append a long list of notes. Or if I find a really good piece of music I like, I have a note as well called repertoire ideas, and I'll just type into drafts real quick if I'm talking to someone about a new piece I want to try. And then I'll have that just instantly in a tap of a button through drafts append my repertoire idea list. Now, it's funny, like, I almost feel like I need a workflow for making this workflow because I have so many times where I'm like making like an append note action in drafts.
Yeah.
But that's a really useful one for me too.
And that's where you could get some lightweight automation. You don't even have to script. You can use prompts and stuff to create say a list action that comes up and asks, shows you a list of buttons and says which list do you want to add to, so you don't have to create quite as many actions and stuff. And a lot of people use it for that similar kind of thing for personal stuff. Like I use it. I have a pen to list action that it's mostly for dumb stuff like movies and TV shows. You hear about a movie you want to remember to see. You just open drafts, type the name of the movie, someone recommended or whatever, type this action, and it appends it to a list of movies. And then when you're ready to sit down and watch a movie, you just pull up that list and say, oh yeah, what was I going to watch? That kind of stuff.
I've got all those same exact lists in my notes. Movies to watch, apps to try, all that stuff.
Yeah. And it's nothing you can't do in Apple's built-in Notes app. It's just a lot of friction because you got to go find that movies note, and there's a lot more tapping to get to it just to write down the new name of the movie. And Drafts saves you a lot of steps there.
So here's a personal question of mine. How much are you willing to talk about the potential of a Mac app for drafts?
I've been making public statements about it. It's not that I haven't always wanted it to come to the Mac, but haven't had the resources to get it there. And part of rebuilding drafts for the version that's coming out has been to make sure all the core technologies that can be shared between iOS and the Mac are all ready to go. And once I get through the release cycle of the new version over the coming months, make sure the initial set of bugs and stuff is fixed. My next step is to get it ready for the Mac. And hopefully this fall, I'll have something out. At minimum, I'll probably ship something that simply allows you to access and create drafts. Maybe not all the powerful actions that you can do on iOS, but I long-term hope to have a full-fledged Mac companion app. And some of that may come down to what Apple announces in June, because there's a lot of rumors surrounding them making some changes to make it easier to have apps work on both platforms. So before I dive too deeply any further into the Mac fray, I'm going to kind of wait for June. We're close enough to that and see what Apple has to announce.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't heard you say as much as you just said right now in any other platform. So that's really exciting for me to hear that you were pending June announcements, planning on something as early as this fall. I would, I've wanted this for years. I would, something that just allows me to type drafts on my Mac, and that's it. Is all I want. That's all I want and all I need.
Well, minimally, you'll get that. Like the app now, there's, you don't have a very technical audience per se, but there's a lot of differences between the platforms that are obvious. But there's a lot of low-level things that can be shared, like the way the data is stored, the way it syncs to iCloud, things like that are all now written in a way that they compile and run on the Mac. The problem is that it needs an entirely different user interface, that's got to be coded from scratch right now. And that piece is not done yet. So I'll get there. But it is actually, in a lot of ways, drafts seem simple on the surface. You open it up and type, but it's actually an immensely complicated and deep app because of the service integrations and stuff. There's so many different things it works with. There's quite a bit of user interface involved, and it takes time to get it coded up.
Well, based on how some of the actions on iOS are written, I actually can't begin to imagine how complex it would be to get all of those to work on the Mac, especially with the X callback. I don't know, like maybe this is too technical a question. If that were possible, would you have to somehow use iCloud to sync the triggering of those actions on a Mac to a nearby?
Well, they would just, when it comes down to it, there'll be some actions that work on both platforms, and there'll be some actions that only work on one platform.
Right.
And that's something that gets complicated, and I need to try to simplify as much as possible. There's some things that are, the services I directly integrate with through their web APIs and stuff like Dropbox and Evernote and OneDrive will just work because they're basically just going out over the web and connecting to those services, and that works fine from either platform, posting to Twitter, things like that. There's system level things that there are very clear cut mappings for, you can copy to the clipboard with an action. Well, there's a clipboard on the Mac, there's a clipboard on iOS. There'll be different code to do that in the background, but it can be done on either platform. There's some things that just don't translate at all, that either there's an API that exists on one platform that doesn't exist on the other, or there's no workflow app on the Mac, so I can't call a workflow from the Mac version. So there'll be, when actions are there, they'll be filtered to know which ones will work on which platform.
But potentially some very powerful actions that could happen on a Mac that could not happen on iOS.
Sure, absolutely. And we'll see. My first priority is to make Drafts the most powerful productivity app on iOS. And, moving forward from there, first step is to get everything accessible, just so when you create those notes, you can get to them on the Mac, or you can create them on the Mac and process them on the phone or whatever. So that's step one. And where it grows from there, we'll see.
Awesome. I want to, unless there's anything else you want to say about Drafts, I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned some of the other apps you have on the App Store. Some of them I think are very useful to me. Is there anything else you wanted to say about Drafts?
No, not in particular, but definitely be looking for the new version coming out soon.
I'm currently running the beta of Drafts 5, and I'm really liking it a lot.
Great.
I wish I was a more diligent at, writing about the bugs I'm experiencing, but really in the latest release, I'm not seeing a whole lot. So
it's getting there. There's still some little bits and pieces to clean up, but I got a pretty large beta group, and I think we're finding most of those things and rooting them out.
Totally. So you've got a couple of apps on the App Store other than Drafts. We mentioned terminology earlier. I don't use anything else to find out what words mean on iOS. So
that's cool.
I think it's great. I totally recommend it.
Terminology is a fun app. I mean, it's a dictionary and thesaurus app. I like it's based on the WordNet data source, which was developed by Princeton University, and it's not a traditional dictionary because it's really they call it a semantic reference, but it's geared around relationships between words. So it has some cool features. It's a great writer's tool because it doesn't just give you a definition, but gives you related words and words that are more specific or less specific, or other relations besides just synonyms and antonyms that make it a fun way to browse words, I guess.
Yeah, totally. You've got Tally.
I do. Tally is a quick counting app that's pretty simple. It's not intended to be complex, but if you have counting needs, I use it in game scorekeeping, stuff like that. It's just a gesture-based app. You launch it and you can tap to count and swipe down to count down, and it's an easy way to keep up various little personal counters.
There are so many ways I could imagine a teacher using a Tally app as simple and easy to use as Tally.
Yeah, I imagine stuff comes
really
up
nice.
all the time that you need to keep up with, little counts.
My favorite use, of course, is to keep score in board games.
Yeah, that is by far my own personal most used bit. I know a lot of people who use it for various personal health and fitness type things. People who have to track how much water they drink in a day, or stuff like that. They keep little counters in there.
Also, you have Diced, a puzzle dice game.
Yeah, that was just kind of something I did on a whim because, well, it's fun to make games. The very first actual software I shipped was a shareware game back in the 90s for the Mac. And, it's always been something I like to do as side projects. And I guess to some extent, I did it for my kids, not necessarily because it was going to be their favorite game, but when they talk about their dad being a programmer and making apps, people are always like, well, what does he make and stuff? And, the kids at the middle school probably aren't that impressed by a note-taking app, regardless of how useful it is. So I thought it'd be fun to have a game out there.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's a cool way to look at it. Yeah, well, they're all fantastic. I mean, I can't recommend them enough. I'm going to certainly link some resources for people to learn some of the feature sets of Drafts in the show notes. But I do recommend everyone checks it out. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I am very grateful. It's been fun. I've been this year in particular, I've been having a lot of software developers on, and many of them are working with creative professional software that's a little bit more music focused. But as someone who is depending on Drafts as deeply as I am, and who's essentially living in that app, I think it's useful to every music teacher. So I appreciate you talking about it in depth.
No, it's fun.
So it's been fun.
Thanks for having me on. It was neat to hear some of your perspective on it too. Good luck with that chaotic lifestyle. I know I could never be a band director.
Yes. Well, we're going to keep fighting the good fight and use the tools we can to make it more manageable in the process. And Drafts is one of those for me.
Cool.